Welcome to KACTV. We are so delighted that you decided to join us for this special episode brought to you by the Kingdom Advancement Center Business Council. Today's episode, Branding for Success, Leveraging Your Resume and LinkedIn. The Father cares about every aspect of your life, including your work life. He wants you to prosper in every way, and that includes in your career. When was the last time you updated your resume? Do you even know where to start? What about LinkedIn? How can LinkedIn help you further your career? These questions and more will be answered in this episode. Welcome to Branding for Success, Leveraging Your Resume and LinkedIn. I want to start off by telling you a little bit about the Kingdom Advancement Center Business Council. So within the Kingdom Advancement Center, we have a 7-mountain council because we do believe that the Father wants the children of God to be on top of every mountain in society, whether that is healthcare or the family mountain or education, government, not only the church mountain, but all of these different parts of society. And so for business, we have the Business Council. Our vision is building generational wealth in every believer's family through God-honoring business and financial principles. Our mission is to educate, equip, and empower every believer to build generational wealth within their families in a manner which honors God in business and finances. It's important that as kingdom-minded believers that we also have generational wealth. A lot of times we talk about generational curses, things that are in our bloodlines that are negative that we want to cut off, but now we also need to think about those things that are positive, things that are blessings that we want to pass on to our children and our children's children. And one of those things is generational wealth. So to break down a little bit more on our mission to educate, we want to produce financially savvy, fiscally responsible believers through education and budgeting, investments, world economy, and business finance. And these are some of the ways that we do this within the Business Council with different budgeting sessions. I think that was the May timeframe, April timeframe, I can't remember now. Our last session that we had was really about flexing your resources in the midst of the pandemic. What type of financial resources do you have? Do you have a budget? So we focused on that. Last time we were together, making sure that your credit score and your credit report are looked at annually. Do you have financial SMART goals that you're trying to achieve? We do have a book here that we recommend. I know he's been in the news lately about some of his comments, so we're going to look for some other books as well, other than Rich Dad, Poor Dad. We also I want to talk about investments. That's not something just for the world, but the Father wants us to invest financially into our futures. So those are some of the things that we focus on the education portion of our mission. For Equip, we want to prepare believers to enter the marketplace, thrive financially, and ascend to high ranks of leadership. And this is what we will focus on today with our seminar for Branding for Success. We want kingdom-minded believers to be in every part of the marketplace. It's not just for us to be within the 4 walls of the church, but we need to be influencing corporations. We need to be influencing corporate brands with a kingdom mindset. And we want to be paid for it accordingly. So that's why we want to thrive financially and help kingdom-minded believers understand how to negotiate their salary and really be compensated for the value that they bring to the organization. And we want Christians to rise to high ranks of leadership, to get into the C-suite, to get into boards and have board positions with corporations. And so within this equip piece of our mission, we want to make sure your resume is up to date. So we'll talk about that today. Your LinkedIn profile and how you present yourself. And also the importance of having an apostolic council or your own personal board of directors, that you have relationships with mentors and sponsors who can advocate for you in the workplace. We do have a part of our Kingdom Institute is a leadership and business series of classes. So to attend those classes or even help facilitate some of those classes. We have a book that's recommended here, Anointed for Business, and then also helping others, because it's not enough for us to just then get into leadership ranks, but we need to pull others up as we climb. And then the final piece of our mission is empower, to develop believers into prosperous landowners and entrepreneurs who create wealth building opportunities for others. In the Bible, you hear a lot about land and us conquering the land and taking over the land. And that's still important today for us to be landowners, for us also to be business owners. And so a big part of this empower piece for our mission is making sure that you have a solid business plan and that you have some advisors that are helping you create that business plan and really bring that business to fruition. So we have had some classes on doing a business plan and also workshops on how to create a business plan. One of the books that we recommend here is Seeing the Big Picture by Kevin Cope, and that focuses on understanding how to read financial statements. And that's not only important for your own business, but it's important for you to understand that for the corporations that you're working for. So then when you get into leadership positions, you are financially savvy and able to speak about financial statements. So here, this is just a summary of what our end goal is as we educate, equip, and empower. When we educate, we want to produce good financial stewards in the kingdom. When we equip, we want to produce capable marketplace leaders. And when we empower, the end goal is to have wealth building entrepreneurs. And that is the introduction to the KAC Business Council. We hope that if you want to be a part of the Business Council leadership team, you can reach out to me. If you just want to get more involved in some of the activities that we're doing, make sure you stay tuned to what we put out there. If you want to reach out to us, like you have a resume that you want to get reviewed, if you have a budget that you want us to review, or a business plan, we can definitely do one-on-one or small group sessions to help you. All right, so I'm going to go into the next part here. Branding. What does your brand say about you? What is a brand? A brand is a public image, reputation, or identity conceived of as something to be marketed or promoted. Now you see the images that I've placed here. And these are pretty well known. If you look at Good Housekeeping, I know back in the day, if a product had the stamp of approval of Good Housekeeping, this meant that it was tried and it was tested, it was proven by the Good Housekeeping engineers and scientists. And so you wanted to have this stamp of approval on your product because that meant something, that increased your brand awareness or your reputation and your identity. And this is even similar if you think about in Ephesians chapter 1, it talks about how we are sealed with the promise of the Holy Spirit. We have the brand of the kingdom on us because we have the Holy Spirit upon us. When it comes our time to face the Father, he's looking for that seal. He's looking for that promise. That is a part of our brand as kingdom citizens. The second image that I'm showing here is the McDonald's brand, which the golden arches is famous worldwide. I put this here because I travel quite a bit for my job. I do international travel. And there's this saying that says, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So if I travel to Japan, I should eat Japanese food. When I travel to Germany, I should eat German food. And I do. I partake in the culture and the cuisine of the location that I'm in. I want to immerse myself in that culture. But truthfully, sometimes I just want some McDonald's fries. And so what I want to do sometimes is see a golden arches, and I find comfort in that because I know what their reputation is. I know what they have a public image. They have an identity of hot French fries. And so that brand is important, and they market that worldwide. Now, when I go to Germany and I pull up to McDonald's and they give me my hot fries, they may also give me a packet of mayonnaise as well, because that's what they do there. But they still have the hot fries. And so that is important to their brand. And then I also show Target here. Now, we all know what we get when we go to Target. We actually may look for the Target sign if we're in a city that we're not familiar with. We know what we're going to get from there. So they have a reputation. They have a known identity that they promote and market. Oftentimes, we may go into Target and we have one thing in mind that we want to get, but we know that when we come out, we may have 5 things that we did not intend to get. That's also part of their reputation and how people shop there. So I just wanted to show you some information about different brands and how those are marketed and promoted. So to break this down a little bit more, with a brand being a public image, a reputation, or identity. The public image is how you present yourself physically, verbally, and online. This is important for us, especially in this time that we're in, where everything is online. A lot of things are online. How you present yourself on a Zoom call, at least from waist up, is important. How you present yourself on LinkedIn and the images that you post. How you speak when you're on a conference call. What is your brand, your public image saying about you? The second one, your reputation. What are you known for? How do people feel or react after being in your presence? Sometimes some people may be known to be very caring. I know Sister Sinesha is known for being very caring. Some people may be known for being a tyrant in the workplace. Some people may be known for bringing folks together, always collaborating. So what are you known for? What is your reputation? When people experience you, what do they say about that experience? And the third item here is identity, your character and personality traits that are specific to you. And really, these are the things that you want people to say about you. Like, this is how you view yourself, and you want others to view you in the same way. And oftentimes it may not match. And so we have to work on making sure that our identity is promoted and marketed in the right way, if you will, so that what you present and what you want to present is in line with what you want others to perceive about you. So what does the Bible say about branding? I'll take you to the Old Testament, looking at David versus King Saul. So if you know, in 1 Samuel chapter 18, this is when David slays the giant Goliath. He slays this uncircumcised Philistine, and this allows the children of Israel, the army, to take down the Philistines. And so after this, the women that are around, they see this, and they actually come up to King Saul, who did not slay the giant. This was a shepherd boy. David was a young shepherd boy that slayed the giant, not the king. And so the women came and met King Saul, and they were playing instruments. And in verse 7, it says, the women answered one another as they played their instruments and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. So imagine how that made King Saul feel. And then if you jump down to verse 14, it says, and David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. So here, not only does David have favor among mankind, but he also has favor with the Lord. And how he behaves himself is now becoming a part of his brand. His brand is becoming so popular that hundreds of people are beginning to join him. If you jump down to chapter 22, verse 2, it says, and everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. So here we see that David's brand was highly regarded in comparison to King Saul. And of course, that didn't make King Saul feel great at all. And as a matter of fact, he went out of his way to try and kill David on multiple occasions. But he wasn't successful because God was with him. The Lord was with him. So think about that even for yourself. What does your brand say about you? Do people promote you? Do people speak about the good things that you do? And then let's look in the New Testament. Even Jesus cared about branding. If you look at Matthew chapter 16, starting at verse 13, it says, when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? He's basically saying, what's the word on the street about me? What are people saying about me? And the disciples answered, some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And this is good company, but he's still Jesus. So they recognize that there's something different about him. In verse 15, he saith unto them, but whom say ye that I am? So now Jesus understands, okay, this is what the word on the street is about me. These people that I'm not spending a whole lot of time about, they have an arm's length view of who I am and what I do. And this is what they say about me. But now I want to know, what does my inner circle say about me? What is my inner circle, who I am? I am sharing a lot about who I am and what I need to do and what I want you to do as my disciples. Who do you say that I am? And then Simon Peter speaks up and says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so here you have two different answers. And this actually helps Jesus figure out, okay, how much more do I need to do? Where do I need to go and what do I need to do so that everyone has that type of revelation as well? Now, this revelation also came from heaven. It came from the Father. And so now how does he work on teaching and sharing and doing signs, miracles, and wonders so that everyone else can experience this type of revelation? So yes, even Jesus cared about branding and wanted to know, what are people saying about me when they experience me? So I'll wrap up with this. You are responsible for managing your brand. A brand is the perception others have about who you are and what you do. And your brand speaks for you when you're not in the room to speak for yourself. Your resume goes out, your LinkedIn profile is there. Maybe you finish working on a project and there are people talking about how the project went and the results. All of that is part of your brand. It ties into your public image. It ties into your reputation. It ties into your identity and how you show up in the world. So what does your professional brand say about you? And today we're going to focus on two elements of your brand, specifically your resume and your LinkedIn profile. All right, any questions or comments?
Hello.
All right. Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I have one actually. Hi. So thanks. It's good to see what KAC Business Council is doing. I think it's great. And I'll probably try and connect with you about that later. One question, you said we're going to talk about resumes and LinkedIn profiles today as two items of branding. I'm just curious, what else is involved in branding, even though we're not going to talk about that today?
So the other parts of branding, I would say, is your network. And the people that are in your network and how you show up around them, and then what they're able to say about you when you're not in the room. So your mentors, your sponsors, your advocates. So that's another part of branding. And then just even how you show, I know we're not in the office now, but how you show up in your office, how you show up even on Zoom calls or Teams calls, whatever platform you're using. For me, one example really quickly is I was completely against video before the pandemic. Like, why do you need to see my face? Why is that important? But since the pandemic, I have been turning on my camera a lot more. And now this is part, I feel like it's part of my brand, that I want you to see me. I want you to see my facial expressions. I want you to see how passionate I am about the work that I'm doing. And you can't always tell that without a face-to-face. And so I'm trying to add that as part of my brand as well. So I would say that that's another part. Does anyone else on the Business Council want to comment? That's cool too. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we are going to jump into the meat of our presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Brother Abel.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm blessed to be here today. Hello, family. It's an honor to be able to share with you some things I've learned over the years. But I'm so grateful for the Kingdom Advancement Center and the opportunities where we can sharpen each other, where iron sharpens iron. But before I kick us off, I thought the branding was such a critical aspect of how to build your resume. I thought it was a great way to kick off the presentation. But what I want you to start thinking about was, when was the last time you were looking for a job? Or maybe you're looking for a job now. Or maybe you know someone who's trying to look for a work right now. You know, think about how that experience is happening for you today. So if you're like a lot of us, it's pretty challenging. A lot has changed. And when you think about the last 10 years and the landscape on how you pursue your new job, things have changed a lot. And so branding and thinking about yourself as an individual and a professional and a subject matter expert can't be more critical when you're designing your resume and your LinkedIn. So my name is Abel. I've worked as a recruiter for over 15 years. And what I like to do and what I enjoy about my job is helping people understand, you know, the role of a recruiter and what their job entails, so to help them better understand how do they navigate that whole process. So in this training, what I want to start thinking about is the role of a recruiter and helping you navigate, how do I build my strategy, my brand strategy around how do I market my experience to the target audience that I'm seeking. So I've titled this Knowing Your Audience because it is a key aspect of your strategy. And so what I want to do is walk you through that and give you a better understanding. So real quick before I go to the next slide, if we're doing sort of an informal poll, just in the comments, just let us know if you have a resume, if you have a LinkedIn profile, or if you have both. And then we'll be able to respond to questions sort of at the end of this presentation. So next slide, please. So one of the things we really need to understand today is just how much that job search has changed. You know, we all know back in the day, you used to get a job. You probably have friends or family who've been fortunate enough to work with them for years. They started, they retired. I hate to tell you, as a recruiter, those days are very rare these days. There's actually studies that show that half of our workforce today and even over the next 5 years will be considered independent contractors. So that's pretty a dramatic change since the last time you probably looked for a job. But when you start thinking in that context as yourself as an independent contractor, you're building your resume strategy around your value proposition. So kicking it off from a brand perspective is very critical on how you market your skills. So what are some questions you need to start asking yourself? So do you even know how to market yourself? Do you know how to explain the value that you can bring to an employer? So that's really the strategy, and the secret here is how do you portray that and communicate that to get the attention of a recruiter. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through what is a typical day in the life of a recruiter. How do they leverage some tools and resources to sift through all these resumes? And you'll start to get a better understanding and appreciation and how critical it is to have certain things on your resume so you get the best exposure. So next slide, please. So I love this slide. I know there's a lot going on here, but it really speaks to some key points that all of you should know today. So on average, a recruiter can receive over 250 applications for one job posting. And as a recruiter of myself, sometimes you can get those applications within the first 2 minutes of when you post the position. So imagine that. Imagine you as an individual, as one recruiter, trying to go through 250 different resumes, and what's the process that they go through that, because they're usually recruiting for over 15 plus jobs simultaneously. So there's a lot of volume that they have to go through, and there's different ways that they go through and sift through that information. So out of the 250 applicants, did you know more than 50% of them don't even fit the job requirements of the job? That means every time you apply to a job where you don't meet the requirements, you're being removed. And that would, so, you know, when you're thinking about how do you take down that 250 applications, you're leveraging technology, or what's called an ATS, to do keyword searches to sift through that volume. So I'll refer to an applicant tracking system as an ATS, but it's good to know what an ATS is, because technology in today's world as a recruiter is utilizing keyword searches that are actually tied to the job description to filter through those 250 applicants. And honestly, what my goal as a recruiter, as you're looking at some of those numbers, I need to get that down to maybe 4 to 6 candidates, that I'm actually sending and forwarding to the hiring manager. So that's the key thing to remember. There is this middleman that's part of this entire process that you've got to get through in order for your resume to make it to the hiring manager. So it is a key role, but if you understand the fact that they're using a system like an ATS to filter through that, what I don't want each of you to do is create this cookie cutter resume thinking that it's going to apply to every job that you're going to submit your resume to. So those are things that I want you to start thinking about, because the end result is, how do we get that number down to 4 to 6 and get those to the actual hiring manager who's going to be reviewing them. So if we can move to the next slide, when I wanted to give you an idea on sort of how the recruiter walks through this process. The very first thing that I do as a recruiter, and I've led recruiting teams as well, when you post a job, typically we don't sit around and wait. And interestingly enough, there's actually a statement we used to use. Is called post and pray. So, you know, if you're a good recruiter and you understand the critical need to fill that position, you're going to be proactive in pursuing your candidates. And one of the tools that, I should say, the most common tool that recruiters will use will be LinkedIn. And so that's why I wanted to start out with LinkedIn, just to emphasize that if you don't have information on LinkedIn, you could be missing out on an opportunity where recruiters could be calling you first before you even start to apply. But what you're looking at here is really just a basic overview on, as a recruiter, when I go into my version, typically I have access to a paid version of LinkedIn. And that gives me the ability to go in and put in keywords that can help me search for people by skill set, by education, by employer, but essentially giving me an opportunity where I can drill down and pull together what I would say 10 highly qualified individuals that I would engage and try to entice them on why our employer would be an employer of choice. So just something to think about, because if you're thinking about pulling together your resume or updating your resume and knowing that the recruiter is going to use keywords to do that, if you're not including, those keywords in your resume, you're not going to be, or your LinkedIn profile, you're not going to be populating to these searches that the recruiters use. So if we can go to the next slide. Perfect. So if you haven't concluded, your LinkedIn profile is probably the single most important tool you can use to attract recruiters today. So if you don't have one, I highly encourage you to start thinking about pulling one together. After this presentation, I'll be sending out some resources that each of you can use. If you have one, start thinking about how do I enhance or optimize that, which I'll walk you through. Because that's essentially where the recruiters will start their journey in trying to fill their position. And then finally, just making sure you've got the right keywords on your LinkedIn profile to make sure you're populating on any of the searches that recruiters are using. So if you can go to the next slide, what I'm going to do is going to start from the top of a LinkedIn profile and work our way down, focusing on some key areas. Some of them might seem pretty basic, but believe it or not, as a recruiter and for as long as I've been doing this, you have a lot of people that don't take it seriously. And so I want to just touch on some of those that I see that are common errors. And the first is the photograph. I know it sounds pretty basic, but that is essentially the first glance at a potential employer could be looking at. So what you want to try to do, obviously, is have a picture of yourself. And I put that in quotes because, believe it or not, some people put pets, some people put vacation spots, some people put motivational quotes. Essentially, you want to include a photographer, or a picture of yourself. Ideally, one that's professional. Again, depending on the level of position or the level of where you're at in your career, obviously, if you're a senior executive, you probably want to be a little more professional and have a suit. But as long as you have a pretty clear picture of yourself that portrays yourself as someone presentable, that's a good starting point. So the only suggestion I'll make is just understand who your target audience is and build your profile around it. So if I was in marketing and they're looking for very creative people, then you could probably be a little more liberal on your picture, but just remember it should be professional. You should come across as presentable and approachable. But the last thing that I'll end with on this slide is get a picture on there. The technology within LinkedIn actually is only as good as the information that you input it. And so by not putting your picture on your profile, you're limiting the amount of times your profile could potentially come up. So anybody that has a picture on their profile will populate first. And remember, if I'm having to go through 30 different people and you happen to be the only one that doesn't have a photo, I might just glance over and skip you and move to the top 4 that have a professional photo. So I know it's a simple addition, but definitely something you should take into consideration as you're optimizing your LinkedIn profile. Next slide, please. So the headline, this is another simple yet overlooked area of LinkedIn. So earlier I mentioned when a recruiter goes on to the platform and does their searches, when the list of people populate, what I see are the job title, and the headline. So the headline you see highlighted here is essentially what I consider a prime area of real estate. And so if your goal is to get the attention of a recruiter, you want to be conscious of what you're putting in that, because that's one of the first things that they're going to see. So I've seen some, just to give you some examples, sometimes I've seen headlines have information on there that have nothing to do with their career. You know, I live and love life. You know, that's one that I saw. Or, you know, just nothing that speaks to their qualifications. So you want to be short and concise. If you can find the top 5 or 6 key skill sets and include that in your profile, that's what the recruiter will initially see. So you'll want to spend some time trying to narrow that down, and again, with the target audience in mind, which I'll be walking you through that process later in the presentation. Next slide. So now moving on to the summary. So summary by definition means short. So what I don't recommend is you putting like a long novel as your summary. Remember, as a recruiter, we don't have a lot of time. So the odds of a recruiter actually reading it, at least in the very initial stages, are probably very minimal. So if you can somehow create and write a summary that's short, engaging, and has those keywords that your potential employer is looking for, you'll want to include that in that summary. Another thing to think about is what I also want you to be aware is something called density. Now, I don't want to get too technical with you, but density is a term that we use in the recruiting world that explains how technology prioritizes profiles in any type of search. So what I mean by density is the more times you have certain keywords in your profile, for example, in your job experience, in your headline, in your summary, your density is going to increase. And what that means is your profile will be viewed by more recruiters that are specific to that area. So again, every one of you have a different situation as far as your career search, but just understanding how critical it is, those keywords, and the impact it has on the back end is very critical. So I wanted to mention that. You don't need to remember the word density, but you just need to remember that the more creative you can be to have those keywords in your profile is only going to benefit you in the long run. But in summary, you want to be short and concise. You want to highlight what value you bring to the organization, and just be conscious of the keywords and how that impacts the density of your profile. Next slide, please. All right, moving on to work history. So this is always a fun one. I've seen different versions of LinkedIn profiles where the dates are incorrect when you compare it to the resume. They're outdated. They don't have any work history. I'll start this slide out by saying, if you have an update on your resume, you changed the job, you have new responsibilities, you transfer to a new area of your company, make sure that as you're updating your resume, that your LinkedIn profile is matched as well. So it's very important, because I know as a recruiter, what we're doing is searching through this technology to find the right candidate. I reached out to you, you're interested, but then you send me a resume that doesn't match what you're marketing yourself on LinkedIn. It raises flags. And when you think about sort of the process of recruiter to hiring manager, you want to minimize the number of questions that the recruiter may have as it relates to your work history, your experience. So make sure those two match. As far as, the content of your work history, another thing to think about is the actual company logo that you work for. So I happen to recruit in the pharmaceutical industry. And so it's almost impossible for me to call out every single pharmaceutical company out there. There's literally thousands. So it's helpful for a recruiter if I come up with a profile that might have worked in smaller companies, but has the company logo on there, because I can click on it and it can give me some information about the company itself. So the cool thing about LinkedIn is when you enter your employer name, it will pre-populate their company information, and 9 times out of 10, it's tied to their branded logo. So I know having a logo sounds simple, but understanding the implications to adding it and why it adds value is what I wanted to explain here. So if your company is active and they have a logo available, just make sure it's included in your work history. And then finally, just being objective. And what I mean by that is you don't want to write a job description on your profile. Some of the things that we'll talk about on the resume side, highlighting your accomplishments, highlighting the projects that you've led or participated. Those type of things is the information that you want to include. So you want to be objective. And again, you're thinking about your target audience. So what is it that I want my target audience to see? And how can I make it presentable where they can quickly skim it and get all the information they're looking for very quickly? So just to recap for your work history, make sure it matches your resume. If there's a company logo on there as you're entering the information, make sure it's included. And then of course, be objective in highlighting all your accomplishments. And you could do that through bullet points or whatnot, but just making sure you have that information. Next slide. So there are some additional sections. We've got a section for certifications, educations. What I wanted, and those are all great, and I encourage you to have those populated. I wanted to highlight the skill sets because this is the section that the recruiters are filtering through. So what do I mean by that? So I can have my entire LinkedIn profile completed and have no skill sets attached to it. What that means is, remember I mentioned density before. When I'm searching, the first area the technology's filters is the skill set. So if you don't have your top 10 skill sets included in your profile, you might be missing out, or you might be behind others that included that information. So there's thousands of skill sets that you can pre-populate in that section, and it'll allow you to include your top 10. So this is where you'll want to, take some time and try to prioritize which ones you want to populate. You can enter more, and it will filter those from a recruiting perspective, but the top 10 you want to make sure that are included in that. The other thing is it establishes you as a subject matter expert or a thought leader. So as a recruiter myself, the basic fundamental responsibilities as a recruiter are the skill sets that I'll include in that section. So recruiting would be a basic skill set that I would put in there. Sourcing is another skill set that any search or keyword that I want a recruiter to see first, you'll want to include that on there. Another thing is asking for referrals. So in LinkedIn, you have the ability to go to your existing network and ask them to add skill sets that they think apply to you. So this is a great strategy as you're thinking about increasing the density of your profile. But that's something I could probably walk you through in a future a future class just to dig a little bit deeper. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is a really cool one. I really love it. So you do have a couple different options in LinkedIn where you can add yourself to a LinkedIn group, or you can start your own LinkedIn group. So I know before this class, we got a question is, how do I leverage my network on LinkedIn to be viewed as an expert or thought leader in my industry? I think that's a great question. And in my opinion, I think a LinkedIn or creating a LinkedIn group is one way to do that. So just to give you an example for myself, I'm in recruiting, but in the Chicagoland area, you do have a LinkedIn group that only applies to recruiters in the Chicagoland area. And so I'm a part of that group. But what that gives me, it gives me a couple different things. One, it gives me access to recruiters from different companies, which is never a bad thing. But two, it starts establishing myself as a subject matter expert in recruiting in my area. Now, some of the things that I'm thinking about, if I wanted to expand sort of my position in my industry, I could create another LinkedIn group that's specific to my target audience. So I might want to look for Hispanics in recruiting, and I'll create that group. And what'll happen is, as people start joining it, I have more access to that specific audience. And depending on what I need it for, I can leverage to get a job. I can leverage it to send over a referral. I can get access to information about a company. So as you're thinking about establishing yourself as a subject matter expert or a thought leader, I think a LinkedIn group is something you may want to consider. It's easy to do. It's free, but definitely a huge tool that you can use in your toolbox as you're establishing yourself in your industry. And next slide, I'll pause for a second and see if anyone has any questions about LinkedIn or how recruiters sort of manage that whole process. And all righty.
Brother Abel, while we're waiting for that, if anybody has any questions, I can pull up my LinkedIn if you want to kind of show.
Yeah, that would be.
Like.
Yeah, if that's easy for you to do, absolutely, I'd love to do that.
Let's see if I can do that. Give me a moment. I'm going to stop sharing.
Sure.
Brother Abel, I think the only question that I had was in regards to understanding the keywords and skill sets and that sort of thing. You know, just really getting a good understanding of how to increase the number of skill sets that you put in there without sounding like or looking like, okay, this is on purpose. Like they're just listing, you know, this one thing over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, no, I think that's a great question. When we take a look at her LinkedIn profile, I wouldn't be concerned about putting too much information or how that could be perceived. When you look at the skill set section, it's not as visible to the naked eye. It's more of a back end thing. But let's take a look. So let's look at this beautiful profile here. No, I love it. So I had the privilege of also looking at the resume. So what at first glance, just by looking at this, I get a sense that definitely a professional. You have sort of that top section where she has some branding there. Nothing is impossible. And then you've got some scripture there. And then you've got a very professional photo, which is perfect. And then you'll notice in her headline, servant leader, bridge builder, barrier remover. So if I'm looking for like a senior project leader, you know, that's already talking to me. Okay, I definitely want to continue looking. I don't want to skip on the profile. So if you scroll down, so here she gives a very brief concise summary where she summarizes what she's bringing to the table. So it's not a book. It's not, you know, you're not keeping too much time away from the recruiter, but it's short enough to where it's enticing me to keep looking. Now, if you continue going forward, your dashboard is what is your view. So you'll notice it says private to you, but you'll see some of the value in having LinkedIn if you don't have one. You can see who's viewing your profile. You can see how many recruiters actually were sourcing or searching for you. And then you could see on the far right, without even doing anything, how many searches your profile is coming up. So the numbers are, I can't really speak to those numbers because I don't know the history there. But as an individual, as you're continuing your search, you'll see those numbers and understand them a little bit better, but just know those data elements could be helpful. So if you've enhanced your profile and you're not getting any searches, you may want to revisit that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then if you continue scrolling down, there's an activity section. This is basically highlighting anything that you might have shared, anything you've liked. So very similar to other social media platforms, but it's all considered more on the conservative professional side. And then if you want to scroll down, this is where your nuts and bolts here. So earlier I mentioned, you know, you want to highlight your accomplishments. Now this is a great example of someone who's been fortunate enough to be working for the same company for, you know, over 14 years. So because of that tenure, she doesn't have to go in more detail. When I read this as a recruiter, I've got sort of her summary, but then you could start to see a nice progression in her career. So she's got great tenure, but she's also moving progressively in the organization. And again, I'll say there's not a one-size-fits-all profile, depending on what your specific scenario is. But for me, when I read this, I'm thinking someone that could potentially be, you know, a high potential candidate who is looking for some runway in her next opportunity. But again, there's some bias there. But the key takeaway here is knowing your audience. So if you can't define that today, or if you don't know the job you're targeting or the company you're targeting, you're essentially you're operating at a very vague level, which you don't want to be when you're thinking about the brand of yourself. Awesome. Thank you for volunteering that.
No problem.
Oh yeah. If you could scroll all the way down there, I'll just finally, if you keep going. Okay. So you've got licenses, skills, keep going down. And then I'm looking for your skill sets. Go back up.
Let's go back up. It's kind of, I guess it's here.
There it is. So yeah, it doesn't appear that you have any.
I don't have any skills, Brother Abel?
That you entered in this section. So
No.
Right below her picture, it says skills and endorsements. If you want to click on that.
This what on the add new skill?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there's a quiz you could take that'll help you. But it's as simple as if you click on team leadership and then you add it. So it will pre-populate based on the information, as you can see here, on what they recommend. But then you can also, you know, manually search for keywords in there and add them.
Okay. So like team building. Okay. And then add.
Awesome. And then I'll just call out there, you'll notice down below, I mentioned you can get endorsed. Go back up a little.
Oh, endorsed.
Right where it says, there you go.
Right.
So you'll notice, it says cross-functional team leadership. Right below it, you'll see endorsed by Roger and one other who is highly skilled at this. So when you leverage your network in LinkedIn, you can ask people to add tasks for you and it'll populate there. Now, the question was, does it seem like I'm bragging or is it too much? When I look at this, it doesn't appear it, but it impacts your density. So if you've got 4 or 5 different people endorsing team leadership, if I'm a recruiter searching for team leadership, there's a strong likelihood you'll be on top of that list. So just something to think about when you're adding that information. And I think that's it. We covered the basics.
Okay. Are there other questions from anyone? All right.
So I'll be doing a search for everyone that's on this call in about an hour to make sure all of you have a LinkedIn profile. Just kidding.
No pressure.
Search mine.
All right, it's time for a quiz. Go to menti.com. It's right here at the top. Menti.com. Put in this code 258104. You can do it on your phone or on your computer. All right. There are people coming in. Menti.com and put in the code. Let's see, we have 8 on. See if we can get a couple more people on. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Answer fast to get more points. ATS stands for what? Applicant tracking system. Applicant tracking system. Majority got it. Good stuff. All right. Get the next one. Oh.
And during your, now with your phone interviews, you can impress your recruiter. And
I know what an ATS is. All right. Good, let's move on. Answer fast to get more points. What is one thing that LinkedIn is not known for? Dating, branding, networking, job hunting. What is LinkedIn not known for? Awesome. I'm so glad everyone got that right. Wonderful. But who answered the fastest got some good points on that. Okay, Rosie's on the board. All right, good stuff. Let's keep it moving. For me is winning. Yes, let's keep going. All right, how will your job search be impacted in the future job market? A little bit more time for this one. Yes, you will need to show your value over and over. That's what they're looking for in the job market. How do you bring value to the organization? Kelly, what happened? Okay.
You know, just letting others gain.
Oh, that's so nice of you. What should you avoid in your LinkedIn profile? Avoid.
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, you do not want to have a novel in the summary section. All right, all right. What is one thing you should not do with your LinkedIn account? Excellent,
Nice.
excellent. Some of you may have a LinkedIn account and you haven't touched it in a while. Now is the
Gotta be
time
me.
to, honestly, I thought about you. I did. I was thinking about you, girl. All right. I don't have a prize for you, Fumi, but
What
yes,
I was just about to ask.
I know, I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But you get a round of applause. Awesome.
I think the real reward is going to be you're on the right track to getting your new job. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So let me get back to our presentation here. All right. Any other questions before Brother Abel continues?
Awesome. All right. All right. So we talked a little bit about optimizing your profile. And I'm hoping, just based on how you all scored in that last session there, that you understand the role of a recruiter. So now we got to start talking about your resume. So LinkedIn is the first page. You baited them. There, you have a resume that called you, wants to talk to you about your background, your experience. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what are some of the fundamentals. You know, you can have a whole separate training session on resumes. Should I use a chronological or functional resume? Should I have a CV? There's all these different resources and templates that you could use. I'm not going to focus too much on that. What I am going to focus is how do you, when you think about your brand and when you think about your target audience, what are the fundamentals that you need to start thinking about when you start pulling together your resume? The formatting, as far as what type, you can worry about that later. But what I want you to start thinking about is what are the, let's get back to the basic. What are the fundamentals that could prevent you from moving forward in the next stage of the process? So if we can go on to the next slide. So what are the fundamentals? What are those resumes? What are the fundamentals of the resumes that when I get them in my inbox or I see that they applied to my job, I want to speak to that person like now? So your goal, what I want you to start thinking about when you think about brand, is think of your resume as a marketing document. And what do marketing documents do? They're enticing the audience that you're trying to convince to make a purchase decision or to use your work. So if you think like that, you want to focus on what is your value proposition. But before I even get there, what I want you to start thinking about, there is a methodology. So I'm actually going to include this roadmap on helping you pull together all the information that you need to start pulling together your resume. And they're focused on those 5 areas, thinking about your target job or your target audience. You want to study the job descriptions. And this is like a pet peeve for most recruiters that I know. We always have those individuals that always apply to every single job. And believe it or not, we all know who those people are. And so you get to a point where you're almost rejecting the same people because we know they applied to everything. So I'm encouraging you to try to be specific. I know there's times where I don't really know what I want to do. Then do your homework around the company. But ideally, if I want to be like the next recruiting vice president, I'd be going to all these job descriptions and studying them. What are the key words? And I'll talk a little bit in more detail about that. I mentioned consider your value proposition. So what are you going to bring in terms of value to the organization and why it matters? Share the things that you're proudest of. So earlier I mentioned accomplishments. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then summarizing and strategizing what are next steps on your resume. So next slide. So as we start thinking about the resume, there's a couple things I just wanted to revisit because it gives some context on why I'm moving in this direction. So earlier I mentioned the recruiter's process. Now, as you're thinking about pulling together your resume, there is a methodology recruiters tend to use to get through that pile, and they tend to look at resumes in a Z. So if you can remember that, it helps you sort of think about, okay, what is the format that I want to utilize in pulling together my resume? Should I put more bullets? Should I have a section that highlights all my tasks? These are all the things that you want to think about, but from a very basic level in terms of formatting, I listed a couple very basic ones that will have a positive impact on how your resume is filtered. One of those is margins. This is one of the things that I've learned to appreciate over time when I'm looking through hundreds of resumes is you don't want your margins to be less than 0.8 inches. And you're probably asking yourself, well, why does that even matter? So what you want to try to do is imagine the recruiter going through all these resumes and how do you entice them to spend a little more time on your resume, to dig a little bit deeper. If you can envision white space around the resume, I don't want to say more is better, but if you can have it to, don't go less than 0.8, it almost forces the recruiter to narrow in on the resume. If you start decreasing your margins less than that, it becomes convoluted. It gives an illusion that there's too much information. And again, if I have any hesitation, I've got 249 more resumes to get through. So I might just table you and tell myself, I'll get back to that. But by the time you're on resume 250, I can guarantee you I already forgot about that one resume I set aside. So again, just think that in mind. So keep your margins no less than 8 inches. And that's for visual presentation. Your font, I always recommend no smaller than 11. If I got to squint, if I got to look at it, if I got to, just spend more time looking at it, again, I'm going to pass over to the next resume. And then as far as length, again, I don't want to get into semantics, but generally speaking, 2 or less pages. If you're an executive or a board member, yes, that makes sense to be longer than that. But if for the most part, you should be able to grab the attention of a recruiter 2 pages or less. And then on the right side, I think we talked a little bit about that already, but it's the content. Hold on, sorry, I lost my place here real quick. And the content is adding applicable information to your resume and not overdoing it and adding too much information where they're going to skip over. If you can go to the next slide, please. So one of the first questions I mentioned on the very first slide is how do you start thinking about your job, your target job or your target audience? So these are some questions that will be included in a template, but they're very basic. So as long as you walk through this, you're gonna get to that point where you understand who your target is. So, these are questions that you can pre-populate or fill out as you're going. So I'm looking for an X job. So that's probably the most critical. You need to decide, am I going towards a specific job at a specific company? So I want to be a recruiter at McDonald's. You know, they have a corporate headquarters in Deerfield. That's where I know I want to work. So now I've got my target. So I want to work at McDonald's and I want to work as a recruiter. So the industry. Now, I've never worked in that industry. So I'm going to have to do some homework. And there's tons of resources online. But I always say, let's start with McDonald's. And sort of drill down from there. You know, what is the mission statement of McDonald's? You know, what does that landscape look like for recruiters? Are they all based in Illinois? Are they national? What are some of the competitors looking for that are not McDonald's? Like, what are the recruiters at Burger King? So those are the questions that I want you to start thinking about. You can be fun with it. You're doing research on your target to better position your resume, your marketing document to speak to that audience. So these are basic questions, but they're very critical. Then I'm going to ask myself, well, what specific experience or skills do I need for this job and for this employer? So I mentioned McDonald's. So for myself, I've never worked in that fast food industry, or, you know, I don't know if they classify as consumer packaged goods, but so I need to be creative on highlighting the skills that I think would grab their attention. So most Fortune 500 companies, like a company like McDonald's, they may have a preferred qualification of someone that works in fast food industry or has recruited in the fast food industry. I obviously wouldn't be able to highlight that, but I might be able to talk to some other qualifications that they're seeking. You have experience doing full life cycle recruitment. Do you have experience in Taleo applicant tracking system? So there's some specifics that I'll learn by studying the job description. And by now you'll probably get a sense. It does take some time and energy to do that, but if you spend the time up front, it's going to make your search a lot easier, and you'll be more prepared when you finally get to the interview. So the next question, based on what I know about these type of jobs, what do I think makes me a good fit? What will I bring to these jobs that will be advantageous or beneficial? So just remember, keep in mind, you're competing with other people for that same job. So if I'm applying to that recruiter job at McDonald's, I can guarantee they probably have 50 other recruiters, all have the experience that also applied. So I have to be creative on how do I set myself apart. So some of the accomplishments I might highlight is I filled 50 jobs in 30 days, but just understand that context. Another thing I'll mention here, and I think it was a question, how do I change careers? So say I'm a recruiter and I want to work at McDonald's in marketing. So I wanted to mention that because if you take into consideration who I'm competing with, if I apply for a marketing manager job, the odds are pretty good that I'll probably be competing with people that have marketing experience that I don't have. So even though I might want to change careers, taking that type of approach might limit me, or I might not even be able to get that job. So I have to think more creatively. So to answer that question, really, I would need to consider maybe going at a lower job and position myself at the company and then make a transition internally. There's not a right or wrong answer. The thing I want you to walk away is if you are making a career change, understand the competitive landscape. It may be tougher. Now, internally, if you're already working for a company and you want to move internally, it's probably an easier way to make a transition because you've got a human resource generalist that you can work with to help you get some exposure. You have your management that should be promoting you to develop. So there's different strategies, but I just want you to understand that when you're pulling together what value you bring, you need to understand the landscape depending on your circumstances. And then that last question, do I have any potential weak areas of skill or expertise? I threw that on there because you don't want to put that on your resume, but you want to be prepared to answer that. So earlier I mentioned McDonald's. I have no experience in fast food recruiting, but if I can get a recruiter on the phone, I can proactively call that out and say, I understand I don't have experience in this industry. However, here's some of the things that I've accomplished in my last job that I think could be value to McDonald's, who has a vision statement to expand their US retail chain. So the more you understand your targets, the more you can start thinking about, how do I position myself and my experience that can entice the company. So next slide would be the next question. I sort of alluded to this, but I wanted to talk a little bit about it. So study the job descriptions. So what are some questions that you can start looking for? What are the requirements or preferred skills or qualifications that are common to these positions? So to the right, I took a snapshot of an example of just a general job description that I looked out there. But what I wanted to talk to was the difference between minimum qualifications and preferred qualifications. Some of you might already know this, some of you might not. But the difference between the two, and sometimes minimum is written as basic qualifications. So when all these companies transitioned over to 100% online applications, the federal government has policies around what employers can or can't do from a system perspective. So by law, they should be posting all of their job descriptions that have both a minimum qualifier and a basic qualifier. And what that means is the minimum or basic qualifications is the bare basics that you need to have in order to qualify to be an applicant for that job. So as you're looking and studying for the job descriptions, personally, I tend to focus more on the basic first. Okay, so do I have a bachelor's degree? Check, yes. If I don't, personally, I wouldn't even bother applying. However, sometimes they might have a little like affidavit or a footnote saying bachelor's degree or equivalent experience. So just, I wanted to make sure you understood the difference between the two as you're starting to prioritize what you want to have or exclude on your resume. So again, minimum or basic qualifications are must-haves. The preferreds are the nice-to-haves. So the nice-to-haves are good to know because if you have the experience, you want to make sure you highlight it. So in the example I gave with McDonald's, if I've never worked in CPG, but I know that's a preferred qualification, if I had it, I want to make sure I'm highlighting that. And there's different areas that you want to do that in. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about value proposition. Well, what the heck is it? You know, and at the end of the day, in the context of job search and LinkedIn and resume, it's basically saying what you're really good at and what value that experience can bring to the organization. So I love the visual, you know, what do you have to offer? What does the market or organization need? And what motivates you? If you can answer those three questions and try to do it in less than 20 seconds, you will be in a really good position to articulate that, whether it's on a resume or in an interview. So example, so for myself, I'm picking on McDonald's just because I know everybody knows that brand. My value proposition for McDonald's as a recruiter might be, you know, I've successfully filled, you know, 50 jobs within 30 days saving an organization $100,000 in agency fees. There's a couple things that I spoke to. One was volume. So if I read a job description that said it's high volume recruiting, that would speak to, so I'm expressing the number of positions that I filled and the amount of time it took me, and then cost savings. So in the job description, it outlined, we're looking to save McDonald's, $500,000 in recruiting fees. But I wanted to give you an example on how you want to start talking about what value you can bring to the organization. So there's not a right or wrong, but if you could answer these questions, what you're really good at, what differentiates you, and you could say that, 20 seconds or less, you'll be in a really good position to, and you should have a good understanding of what your value proposition is.
Brother Abel, I have a comment about this too, with the value proposition. One of the things that I think about as well is, how do I save the company money? How do I make the company money? How do I save time?
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the things that I think about too, as I'm trying to put down what are my accomplishments, or what type of value do I bring?
No, I'm glad you called that out, because it is a key. Those are some key components you need to be able to answer, and the only way you'll be able to answer that is understanding the job description, understanding the company. The more information you have, or intelligence that you have, you'll be able to refine what are the right answers for the audience you're pursuing.
Mm-hmm. And then one other thing too, because I was in an interview earlier this week, and one of the questions was, talk about how you increase productivity or profitability. So still kind of along those lines of efficiency and making money or saving money.
Yeah, those are definitely some key areas. And I'm guessing those questions, or being able to answer those questions, are aligned to the level you're at in your career. So if I was like an admin assistant, I might not necessarily have to articulate it, but if you understand it and you proactively present it in an interview, you're only going to impress the interviewer even more. But yeah, to be able to answer those questions despite your role in the organization is definitely will get you ahead of a lot of people that are just not doing their homework.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Next slide. There you go. So sharing the things you're proud of. So this is my favorite. So I'm not saying that I like to brag, but for me, it's easier to articulate my experience by sharing the accomplishments that I've had in the past. So how do I get a list of those things that I'm proudest of? Just write them down. Ask yourself, what am I most proud of? What do I consider my crowning moments? I saved the company X amount of money. I implemented a process improvement within 6 months. There's a number of different things that you can list, but those are some questions you want to start asking yourself. And so I put an example of some achievement statements, is what I call them. Developed a new employee orientation that 100% of the company locations adopted. So that's a huge one. If I'm going for like project manager and they're looking for someone that could streamline processes, that would speak to me. Responded to over 85 customer calls daily and solved 90% of their concerns. Again, this could be for a call center. I was applying for a call center, high volume. This could speak to sort of how I deliver. Served customers in a positive way, received 2 customer service awards in the past year. Assisted credit manager and account collection by phone and mail, increasing accounts receivable by 20%. So again, I'm hoping that you're starting to pull together some ideas that if you can give some concrete accomplishments and they're speaking to the job, it's only going to benefit you in that whole entire process. I think that's it. If we can move on to the next slide. So the information that I've given you so far should get you to a point where you have all the information that you need to start pulling together your resume. And yes, depending on how many years experience you have, it might take some time. But just know that if you put the time up front, it'll benefit you in the long run. But this stage is really about pulling everything together and prioritizing what you should or shouldn't include on there. And so what I personally do is usually I'll have a job description in front of me. I have the list that I pulled together, and I'm sort of pulling out what is speaking to the job description. So a lot of you are probably thinking, well, how do I do that? What's the format? I'm going to send you a template that you can just plug and play. But on this slide, I'm giving you an example on what I think is a really good example on how they did that. And you'll notice as you're looking at the job description or the resume, so she has her title. She has a very brief summary of what they did. And then she has 3 bullets. So she kept it short and sweet. And you'll notice she put it in bold. I built, I delivered, I negotiated. So when you start thinking about your accomplishments, using action verbs definitely are critical, but also adding a little more detail as far as what you actually implemented. So you built processes for the finance department. You delivered 42,000, and the result was an annual cost savings. You negotiated contracts with who and other vendors. So I'm assuming that in this case, they're speaking to a job that's looking for those key skill sets. Next slide. So one of the this is always a fun question I get. I'll preface by saying there's no right or wrong, okay? But what I wanted to do is give you a couple ideas to think about. So if you have gaps in your career, and what I call career bloopers. So I'll speak for myself. A long time ago, I've been in jobs that I just wasn't a right fit for. Wasn't a culture fit. Those jobs I've excluded off of my resume because I was either in the job for 6 months or less, or I just quit the job. So how do you bridge those gaps? So I give a couple different ideas that you might want to consider. Again, it just depends on your situation. So that the first one I included was, so for job 1, you'll notice on my resume, I put June 2010 to March 2013. So how could I be creative in doing that? What you could potentially do, actually, no, I'm missing a slide actually. Okay, here we go. So job 1. So job 1, I put down June 2010 to March 2013. So that is actually a shortened version of having an actual date. So this is one idea where I've only been with the company for a certain period of time. I didn't want to be specific on dates. The next employer, so you could be creative and take out the days. But still you'll notice in that example from March 2013 to September, they didn't really articulate what they did. So were they fired? Did they take a vacation? Were you laid off? So on the right of that, one idea is you could put your jobs by year. So instead of having the month, you put the year. Again, it's not a picture perfect idea, but it gives you some opportunity to sort of fill in the gaps. At the end of the day, I would just ask you to consider, how long is that gap? If it's short, it's okay to have a few months gap. You know, recruiters are familiar with that. If you have a multi-year gap, if you can articulate something that you've been doing in between, whether it's, you know, volunteer work, whether it's a project, something that sort of bridges and tells that story. But again, you're thinking you just need to get on a phone, or you need to interview with a recruiter, just something that can just entice them to make that phone call. So I'll end by saying, you know, you could take out the months and just put the years, and then sort of add in the job description, sort of what happened. Or you can add in some miscellaneous position that you've worked on to sort of bridge the gap. But again, it really depends on the circumstance. Next slide. So what I wanted to do is just show you some examples of how your resume can start to improve. So I wanted to give you sort of an example of, this is fictional. So Deanna Parker, when you look at this resume, and if I was looking at 100 more, you notice you have to sort of, it's not easy for you to pinpoint the experience. It's jumbled. There's no formatting. Looking at this resume, I would probably skip over to a different one. So I wanted to provide an example of an extreme example on, you know, one that lacks any type of format. So let's work on her resume and improve it so that we could start adding some format and calling out of her experience. So if you go to the next slide. So we took that same information, we walked through all of those questions. So working with Deanna, she's able to start to add a little more description on her responsibilities. She's starting to take out some inappropriate or irrelevant information. So having salary on your resume in the United States is, I've never seen that as a common practice. Have I seen it as a recruiter receiving resumes? Yes, I've seen it. I don't recommend that you put it on there. These are things that could be negotiated. Again, if it's a flag for a recruiter and they're looking at this and you put a salary on there that you knew you were negotiable, I might move on to something else. So information on pay, you'll want to remove. You'll notice on the bottom, she still included some personal information. Again, in the context of a recruiter going through 250 resumes, do I really care about your personal information? I would say no. So that's an area that I say remove it. But again, you have to know your audience. So it could apply to a certain company, but I recommend, at least as a starting point, to have that removed. So if you move to the next slide. So now we're starting to get some structure on there. So just right out of the gate, comparing it to the first resume, you'll start to notice it's starting to look better. You'll notice it's got some structure to it. There's no bullets on there. So again, I have to work. If you're trying to read this resume and I'm like, okay, I'm gotta try to figure it out and read these sentences, we still got some work to do. But I wanted you to get a sense on how this transformation works. Because you'll notice in this example, I've got to dig. So the contents is good. We've got to try to narrow that down and make it an easier, consistent for the recruiter looking at the resume. Next slide. So now we're starting to get a little bit better. So out of the gate, this looks so much better than the first version. So what she did, you'll notice the bullets there. So a pet peeve of mine is you'll want to be consistent. So believe it or not, sometimes people have different bullet points by font. So sometimes they're bigger bullets, then smaller bullets. Sometimes I've seen different font across the board. Here, it looks pretty decent, so much better than the first iteration, but she's starting to add structure. So she was creative and she's bolding her title. Okay, so she's adding bullets. Personally, I like when you have consistent bullets, so you would have 3 for each job, but this is still better than the first one. So you'll notice she has 3, then 4, then 2, then 4, then 3. So if she's applying for a job where they're looking for someone that's got, attention to detail, this might be someone I would table, but the format is starting to get a lot better. Made leadership development manual. So earlier I mentioned having action verbs. Made seems to me like a weak choice. You could be creative and use something like design and implemented a new leadership development manual. So same topic, just worded differently. But just wanted to give you some examples there. Next slide, please. And this is probably the most fundamental. I'm guilty of it too myself, but try to have someone just look at your resume. Having a second set of eyes can help pull out some minor errors, because on more than one occasion, I've seen job titles that they're applying for spelled incorrectly. And honestly, it may not even be their fault. It could be spell check that automatically changed it, but having someone just do a second take is always a best practice. So here, when you're reflecting on the original resume, it looks so much better. You could see that she's working at Regent University, even though there's a typo, the location, she's got the time that she's been there, 2005 to present, and then it's easier to see each of the job titles in bold. So still not perfect, but it's like night and day compared to the first round. So what does it look like when you compare the two before and after? So this next slide, and depending on your current situation, you could see the dramatic difference. So this is the same individual with the same qualifications who took the time to understand her audience, to add some format in the context of understanding how do I make it easier to highlight my experience so a recruiter who's looking over 250 resumes can quickly get to what they need. So a lot of work up front, but now you've got a really good template that you can start using and tweak depending on the job. So I just wanted to show you sort of a before and after. Now, as far as format, you've probably heard terms like functional or chronological. So I've worked probably with 6 different Fortune 500 companies. I've never seen a functional resume. I'm pretty confident in saying that, chronological is pretty much the standard. So if you ever have questions around that, I would always go with the chronological. And I mentioned earlier, after this, we'll send over some templates. Like with Deanna's case, you can fill in the blanks. So the formatting's already there. You could just start pulling together your information that applies to it. Next slide, please. So these are, again, I know some of this sounds basic, but believe it or not, I get a lot of resumes that don't focus on just the basics. So here are some do's and don'ts I pulled together. As far as file format, when I mentioned earlier about keyword searches and applicant tracking systems, by now you should know technology is utilized from a recruiting perspective to filter resumes. Why am I saying this now is when you think about applying to those systems, depending on the format that you're using, that might upload and distort the information. So most applicant tracking systems accept or have minimal issues importing your information if you're using Microsoft Word or PDF. But don't ever use images. I know in some other countries, that's a common practice. In the US, if you're applying for a position in the US, don't include images, like your pictures or any other images, because that could distort the upload. Try to name your file, like your first name, there isn't a convention that you should use, but make sure your name's on it, because what happens is sometimes the recruiter might be downloading resumes and then they'll have to look for it. So something as simple as just naming your resume file with your name will help that. Try not to use any special characters. So again, I've gotten resumes of people who applied that have something creative and they're using special characters in the file name. And what happens is if they use like a $sign, the system will import it, but that $sign actually is a code to something, and when their application comes through, their resume isn't attached. So if I have to call you to let you know that your resume isn't attached to it, honestly, I wouldn't probably take the time. I'd move on to the next person. But just know that your file name could have an implication. Just name it your name, just to prevent any of that happening. I mentioned the proofreading, check the spelling. Make sure you get the job titles correct, especially for the jobs that you're applying to. Try not to use like Excel tables or boxes. Again, think system, think ATS. Anything that you think it will be distorted, try not to use. Add your skill sets. And these are skill sets that could match LinkedIn. Here, there's a don't write in header and footer. I agree with that, yes, but there is a trick that you can also use in your footer. What I usually do is in my footer, I'll include my keywords, but I'll put it in a white font. So I don't want the recruiter to see it, but I know when you're thinking about density, even if I have keywords in my resume, the more times that keyword is on that resume, the more it'll apply to the search results. So I usually am sort of creative in putting keywords in the footer, but making sure they're in a white font so nobody, visually the recruiter isn't going to see it, but I know the system is going to be looking for it. And then that last point, do match job title when possible. What I mean by that is some companies have their own cultural norms and what they call certain people, but it's the same job in another company, but use a different title. Try to use the title that's applicable to your target audience. For example, I used to recruit for Abbott. Abbott doesn't use the word recruiter. They use account manager. So if I'm applying to them, when I'm adding my titles, I'll put account manager as my title. If I'm applying to McDonald's, they call their recruiters recruiters. I'm going to have my titles recruiters. So again, speak to your audience if you can. Well, what if I don't know what titles they use? Go on LinkedIn, search the company, look for those people that are doing that job, and you'll see what they have listed on there. But usually the job title of the job posting is a good indicator on what that title uses. I think that's it for that slide. I know the question that I had around was format, but I think I answered that. Whenever possible, try to use Microsoft Word or PDF. But outside of that, I will open it up for questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
This is Kim. So for someone who is kind of just getting started in their career, so I've had many jobs, been working since 15, but I'm starting to get into my career as of like 2016. I've been at the same job for the last 4 years, but on my resume, I have like all the old stuff, like the customer service jobs I've done, but I'm in education now. So would you, as far as like trying to, like, I don't want to make it seem like I haven't had a job until since 2016, but if I'm looking for another job in education, that customer service experience isn't really relevant to that. So what do you do in that position?
Yeah, for me, what I would start out by asking is, so who's your target audience or your target job? Do you have that already identified?
Yeah, so I'm looking to move into another department within education. So I work in financial aid now, so I'm looking to move into advising.
Okay, and so it sounds like you want to stay at the certain company and you want to transfer over into a different job. Am I understanding you correctly?
Not necessarily. I could go to a different school. I just want to go into a different part of the business, I guess. So I'm on student services, but academic advising would be in academics. That's a different business within the higher education institution.
But is it with the same institution or different?
It doesn't have to be. So I can move
Okay.
I can move into advising in Roosevelt, or I could do advising at another school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the reason why I'm asking is if you're wanting to stay in your current institution and your previous job responsibilities don't apply to your target position, how can I creatively highlight any applicable skills that may apply even though it wasn't the job? So internally, what I would suggest or recommend doing, since I am internal, how can I have what I've called informational interviews? So it's usually a confidential conversation with the hiring manager, asking them, I have some interest. What are some key skill sets that you're looking for in this type of job? And then come back to my resume and include it. So I would recommend you still include that experience since you're earlier in your career, but you're highlighting any applicable experience that could speak to what you've done that it could apply for that job.
Yeah, I can add on to that too. I think even some of the jobs that you may have had that were not in education, but still were in the vein of customer service, whether that was in retail or fast food or whatever, you can still put those down. And maybe in your summary at the top, you mention how you have significant customer service experience. And then that kind of ties into what you have in the earlier part of your job history. So also what Brother Abel is saying is highlighting those customer service pieces, because even though like you're in financial aid now and you want to eventually get into maybe student advising, that still has a strong customer service element. And so those are the things you want to highlight. And especially if you're looking at the job description and it mentions that, you want to just pull those elements out of or highlight those elements in your previous job experiences.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong. I would just say the most information you can get regarding your target move, whether it's internal or external, will help you sort of shape that. But when you're early in your career as a recruiter, you're not so much focused on applicable experience. It just depends on the level and the position that you're applying to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Other questions? Anyone?
Yeah, hi, this is Fumi. Thank you so much, Bro Abel. I have a question actually. It's about when you talked about what you're proud of, or, you know, sort of highlighting all your accomplishments and all that. I know many of us as women, or at least many women that I've come in contact with, sort of struggle with that. I mean, it seems so much easier for men to sort of say, yeah, I did this, I did that, even sort of overstating what it is they did, but a lot of women, and I'm no exception, tend to minimize. It's like, yeah, I mean, you just kind of do that all in the course of a day, and you do it, you forget it, and you sort of move on. So how do you sort of properly highlight those things? I mean, many of them, how do you sort of remember them even? Yeah. And you know, Pastor Key can jump in as well.
Yeah, that's, you know, I can definitely appreciate the question. I come from a Hispanic family, Hispanic roots, and culturally, it's not common to, I'll use the word brag, for lack of a better word, about your accomplishments. So I can sort of understand the question. But what I've realized in my career, moving into corporate America, it's really about highlighting what value you bring to the organization. So you want to try to compartmentalize that emotional aspect of it and look at it from a business perspective. So your individual or your personal value proposition. And it does take work. Like sometimes I'll have to sit and revisit some of my old jobs and ask myself, well, what did I accomplish during that time frame? So there is going to be some time involved. But once you pull together that list, that's where you pick and choose what you want to highlight that applies to the job description, that basic qualification. And if you have that experience, that preferred qualification. And I usually try to stick, 3 to 4 accomplishments or 4 bullets. But yeah, the template that I send over, it's going to sort of prompt you to start thinking about that. And then the templates that I provide on the resume side, I think will give you a format that you could start plugging in, but it'll take some time, but don't think about it as like bragging. Think about it as value. And I think in this day and age, with the competition out there, I think that's going to be critical to move past. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, I can add on to that as well, because I have definitely struggled with that myself. And one thing that I started doing, I've gotten out of practice a little bit, but when I was doing it, it really helped. I would keep a log of my accomplishments during the year. I wouldn't wait until I was getting ready to do my resume to sit down and try and think, okay, what have I done over the past 3, 4, 5 years? So I kept a log throughout the year, because also when you do your mid-year and in-year reviews, they want to know that type of stuff, or you should tell them that type of stuff. Like, look, you gave me this project in January, I had 6 months to complete it. I completed it in 4 and I saved money. So actually documenting those things, saving emails when people say, hey, you did a great job, keeping a collection of those and holding on to those so that you have something to reference. When I do get ready to sit down and work on my resume, I pull up all of my employee dialogues and reviews to see what did I say and what did my boss say as well. And then it starts to jog my memory if I haven't been diligent in keeping track of my accomplishments. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would highlight too is what struck me in the presentation as well was about the basic qualifications and the preferred qualifications. Typically, as women, we want to check every single box before we apply. And typically for men, if they check 2 or 3, they're good and they apply. And so as women, we have to get out of that mindset that we have to check every single box and make sure that, I agree, we definitely need to check on the minimum and basic requirements, but know that we have the ability to do more once we're in the job, and to surround ourselves with people that can help us and support us with that as well. And that's something even for me, I've had to think about. But what Brother Abel was saying is true from a recruiter standpoint. This interview that I was just in this week, the first thing that she went through was the minimum basic qualifications. Okay, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? Okay, now let's start with the interview. So definitely make sure you meet the minimum. Preferred, if you hit a couple, that's cool. You don't have to hit all of them.
All right. Thank you
One
so
thing,
much. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, one thing I would also add, this is Kelly, is listening to your classmates, getting feedback from them. I don't know if you're in school or not, or your immediate coworkers. There has definitely been some benefit of, just actually getting, feedback from people that you're currently working with and around to maybe help you identify some of the skill sets that you may not readily just think about all the time that you're doing well. And then also some opportunities of things areas where you can focus and start working on, because everything that Abel and Pastor Kiana had indicated really does help you. I know it's helped me kind of narrow down what key topics or key words that I should focus on when I'm looking at a particular resume, or looking at a particular job requirement, to see, am I meeting it? What things can I pull out as what they're looking for as strengths that I already possess, to just enhance that a little bit. But then it also gets me to thinking about, how my presence at work, when I'm just in my moment and doing my thing, actually translate when I am looking to promote and move forward.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I have one more question. So I currently have a CV because I've been working in Nigeria for the past few years, and now kind of looking to translate that to a resume. So I sent it out for feedback, and one person told me, she's like, "Oh, that you may be, like people might overlook. I have a PhD, and so she's like, oh, you might be overqualified, and people might sort of overlook your resume, and so want to sort of minimize that. But I don't really want to do that. So yeah. So how do you handle that in transit? So I'm sort of looking to have a transition. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how or where, but so I don't want to minimize that kind of stuff. But that's part of the advice I've received, for instance.
Yeah, that's a common question I get, even personally. I've myself, how do I appear not to look and in your case, you're transitioning from a CV over to the resume. So I don't think there's a right or wrong, but understanding your audience, you may have to tweak some things, even though you may not want to. What do I mean by that? So if you think about the resume as your marketing document, the way I look at it is I just need that to get me in front of the manager. If you can get me in FaceTime in front of the manager, I feel pretty confident I could get the job. So how do I minimize anything that'll prevent me from getting to that point? So overqualification is a big one. From a recruiting perspective, I get people like vice presidents that apply to, a manager level job. Now, from a recruiting perspective, that's a resume that I might table, not because they're not qualified, but I want to see who else has applied and who may not, what we call a flight risk. So the challenge that you have is really personal bias. The common concern with someone taking a step down, despite their circumstance, is that they're coming in from a short-term perspective. They're going to come in and then they're going to find another job and leave. So that's the bias you likely have to work around.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually.
So if the job doesn't require a PhD, I wouldn't include it. I would include the bachelor's.
But then, for instance,
you can highlight all of your Sorry. Still there?
Oh, yeah, you were breaking up. Go ahead.
Hello?
Still breaking up. I have a comment while Brother Abel is working on his technology. I mean,
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Yeah,
Yeah, we can hear you now.
it went out again.
Yes.
Yes, we heard you say yes.
And now it's breaking
Now
again.
it's breaking up. One thing that I thought about is, you know, it's a great accomplishment to have your PhD. And I mean, I would wear a shirt that said PhD every day if I had a PhD. But one thought that I had was your headline, maybe you don't put doctor or PhD in your headline, but in your education, you could still put it. But the education is at the very end. At least in my resume, it's at the very end.
Okay.
So that was one thought that I have. I don't know how you feel about that, because it's like you worked hard for those letters. I get it.
Right. In fact, one of the things I'm thinking about when I'm shortening my my LinkedIn profile link is Dr. Fumi. That's like, or Fumi. How else am I going to distinguish myself from all the Fumis out there?
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to put I'm thinking Fumi Akinyele PhD as the link, as the, you know, so even the link title, and that would be the title of my LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you might have to try a couple of different things and see, basically change your bait, and see how it works for you. If you've been using PhD and doctor and you haven't been getting a lot of hits, you might have to remove it off of your headline or off of your, because you may not want that to be the very first thing that they see, because they may be like, oh, that's too much, we don't need that. But it still should be listed in your education because you did do that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done anything with my profile in years. So this is all this is all something I'm planning to do.
Okay. Brother Abel, did we get you back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I know we're over time, guys. Are there any, but I wanted to give you all a chance to ask any other questions. Anything else?
I did have a comment, I guess, for Brother Abel, or question. So you mentioned earlier with the resumes that a chronological resume is better than a functional resume. I've used functional resumes, and I just am curious, I guess, what the reason is for saying a chronological resume over a functional resume, because in career transitions, I've used functional resumes because of my experience or titles of my experience not lining up with what people see. Because I guess my thought process is when people see my resume, they see the titles that are there and they're like, oh, she doesn't have what it takes. But the functions and what I've done and the accomplishments actually do. So if they don't take the time to get past the titles, then I lose out on that opportunity, which is why I use a functional resume. Curious.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think there's one resume that's one size fits all. I think it just depends on your target. But if you're in your situation, if you're applying online, there's a risk that when your resume, if it's not chronological, when it's imported, it's going to get. And so in the context of remembering how a recruiter manages their day, your resume might come into their system jumbled. And so chronologically, those resumes, from what I observe, tend to import seamlessly and make it easier for me to find your resume. But again, one isn't right or wrong. It just depends on your situation. Like if your audience is people that you have access to and you can email your resume directly, just really depends on the circumstances. But I personally haven't seen any functional resumes recently. But if you're finding success on the functional side, I would say run with it.
I'm just curious. I just wonder if there were big hang-ups with it.
Okay, guys, I need you to go to menti.com and put this code in. We're not going to do the last quiz. I just want to get some feedback from you all before you go on how today's seminar went. So thank you guys for joining us. I'm going to close this out with prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you. We thank you that you are still on the throne and that you desire us, Lord, to take over the business mountain, to shine our light, to let our light so shine before men that they may see our good works but glorify you in heaven. Father God, help us to take all of this wisdom and knowledge that we've gained today, Lord, and to put it into action. Help us to be wise as serpents, but gentle as doves as we go out into the workplace, as we go into nonprofit organizations, Lord. Father God, just help us to shine our light, to take all of the fruit of the Spirit, all of the gifts of the Holy Spirit into corporate America, into the nonprofit space, into the education space, Lord, and to really elevate you and elevate the kingdom of God in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. If you have comments, please put them in. If you have private comments you can want to share with me, that's fine too. And we'll keep you posted on the next KAC Business Council seminar. Make sure you also, if you have not subscribed to KACTV on YouTube, we will actually be back in the church tomorrow. So thank you so much. Have a great day and blessings to you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode filled with great information to help you take hold of what the Father has for you in your career. Make sure you like and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe to KACTV. Be blessed.